My pregnant granddaughter died on the delivery table, and her in-laws opened a bottle of champagne in the hallway like it was a birthday party. They hugged each other, laughing, while I stood there with blood on my hands from holding Lily's purse and praying she would live. Then the doctor brushed past me and slipped a folded note into my palm like a crime scene tip. What would you do if you were me? Before you answer, read this all the way through because I need to know if I'm the one who went too far. And if you've ever watched a family weaponize grief, tell me how you would have survived it. My name is James Williams. I'm 67 years old, a grandfather, and I've spent most of my life believing that if you show up and love people hard enough, it counts for something. Lily was my granddaughter, my late daughter's only child, and the best thing our family had left. Lily used to call me Grandpa James when she was little, like she was afraid the world might confuse me with some other grandfather who didn't show up. I showed up for everything. Ballet recitals, science fairs, broken hearts, flat tires, the day she got her first apartment, the day she brought home the man she said she was going to marry. His name was Ethan Hargrove. Ethan looked clean, expensive, and practiced. He shook my hand the way people do when they want the interaction to be over before it begins. His parents were behind him like matching bookends, Victor Hargrove with a smile that never reached his eyes, and Marlene Hargrove wearing pearls in the middle of the afternoon like she was already auditioning for a courtroom photo. They lived in a part of town where the streets curved like ribbons and the houses sat far back from the road, protected by gates and landscaping that looked like it had its own staff. Lily didn't belong there. Not because she wasn't good enough, but because she was too real. She laughed too loud. She cried when movies ended. She brought homemade cookies to parties where people served food on miniature spoons. She worked as a pediatric nurse while Ethan bounced between opportunities his father arranged. She didn't have their instinct for cruelty. At the engagement dinner, Marlene leaned across the table and said, very gently, "Lily, you're lucky. You're marrying into stability." Victor followed it with, "And into a legacy. Our family takes care of its own." I remember the way Lily squeezed my knee under the table like she was asking me not to make a scene. I gave her a small nod. I told myself to be patient. I was wrong to be patient. The first year of their marriage, I saw less and less of her. Text messages answered hours later, calls that went to voicemail, plans that got canceled because Ethan had family obligations. Lily's voice got quieter, like someone had trained her to take up less space. Then she told me she was pregnant. She came to my house alone, hands shaking, smiling like she was afraid the smile might break. She pulled a tiny ultrasound photo out of her purse like it was a sacred object. "I haven't told them yet," she whispered. Them, meaning the Hargroves. I should have asked why. I should have asked what had happened in that house behind those gates. But Lily was glowing, and my heart was so full I could barely breathe. I hugged her. I told her she'd be a wonderful mother. I told her I'd be there for every appointment if she wanted. Her eyes filled. Then she blinked it away and said, "Just don't fight with them. Please." It wasn't a request. It was fear. When Victor and Marlene found out, they reacted like Lily had delivered them an investment portfolio. Marlene kissed Lily's cheek once, careful not to smear her lipstick, and said, "Finally." Victor put a hand on Ethan's shoulder and said, "A son. Our name continues." Lily said, "We don't know what it is yet." Victor looked at her like she was being difficult on purpose. "We'll know soon enough." From that moment on, Lily's pregnancy wasn't Lily's pregnancy. It was theirs. They chose the obstetrician. They chose the hospital. They chose the birthing plan like it was a business contract. Marlene attended appointments and corrected Lily when Lily spoke about her own body. "No, dear, you don't want that. You'll thank me later." Ethan sat on his phone during ultrasounds, only looking up when the doctor said something he could repeat to his parents. Lily tried to keep me out of it, but sometimes she slipped. A bruise on her wrist she blamed on a cabinet door. A tremor in her voice when she said she was tired. A night she showed up at my house at 2 a.m., eyes red, and asked if she could sleep on my couch just for tonight. I let her. I didn't ask questions. I hated myself for that later. When she went into labor, I got the call from Ethan. "We're at St. Catherine's," he said. "You should come." The way he said it made my skin tighten. Not because he sounded scared, but because he sounded organized. Like this had been scheduled. I drove like a man chasing oxygen. My hands were white on the steering wheel. I prayed out loud, the way I hadn't since my wife died. St. Catherine's was private, polished, quiet in a way hospitals usually aren't. The lobby smelled like citrus and money. When I got to labor and delivery, I saw Victor and Marlene standing near the nurse's station with coffees in their hands. Ethan was sitting with one ankle crossed over his knee, watching something on his phone. He looked up when I arrived and gave me a nod like I was a delivery. "Where is she?" I asked. Marlene smiled. "In good hands." That's not an answer. Victor stepped closer, just enough to make it a contest. "Mr. Williams, we appreciate you coming, but we need calm energy right now." Calm energy. My granddaughter was in a room behind those doors, pushing life into the world, and he wanted calm energy. I moved toward the doors. A nurse stepped in front of me. "Sir, only one support person is allowed right now." "Her husband," Marlene said smoothly before I could answer. Ethan didn't even stand up. He just lifted his coffee slightly, like a toast. I looked at him and saw nothing that resembled love. Hours passed. The hallway clock ticked loud enough to hurt. Nurses came and went, faces unreadable, voices low. At one point I heard Lily cry out, raw and animal, and my whole body reacted like I'd been struck. I took a step toward the doors again. Victor's hand clamped onto my forearm. Hard. "Sit down," he hissed, the first crack in his polite mask. "You will not make this worse." I stared at his hand on me. I stared until he let go. Then Marlene's phone rang. She answered with a soft, "Yes?" and walked a few steps away. I watched her face. The corners of her mouth pulled upward, slow and satisfied. She came back and whispered something to Victor. Victor's shoulders loosened, as if he'd been holding tension for show and could finally release it. Ethan stood up, finally, and stretched like he'd been waiting for a delayed flight. I stood too. My heart was beating wrong. "What happened?" I asked. No one answered me at first. Then a doctor came out. He was in his 40s, dark circles under his eyes, his posture stiff with exhaustion and something else. He looked at Victor and Marlene before he looked at me. "I'm Dr. Patel," he said. I stepped forward. "How is Lily? Where's the baby?" Marlene's hand went to her mouth in a performance of grief that didn't touch her eyes. Victor spoke first. "Doctor, just tell him." Dr. Patel swallowed. His gaze flicked down the hallway, then back. "There were complications," he said. "We did everything we could." I felt my body go cold, like someone had drained it. "No," I said. "No. Tell me exactly what you mean." Dr. Patel's jaw worked like he was biting down on something. "Your granddaughter did not survive the delivery." The hallway tilted. My vision tunneled. "And the baby?" I managed. A pause. "The baby did not survive," Dr. Patel said, each word sounding like it hurt him to say. I made a sound I didn't recognize. It came from somewhere below my ribs. Ethan turned his head away like my grief embarrassed him. Then, and I swear this happened, Victor exhaled like he'd been holding his breath for months. Marlene's eyes shimmered, not with sadness, with relief. Ethan reached for his mother's hand. "It's over," he murmured. "Over." My granddaughter was dead, and he said it was over. I took a step toward him, and for a second I honestly thought I might hit him. I'm not a violent man, but I was a grandfather with nothing left to lose. Victor moved between us, voice low. "Control yourself." And then they did it. right there, in that sterile hallway. They hugged each other like they'd won something. Victor kissed Marlene's forehead. Marlene let out a quiet laugh that she tried to disguise as a sob. Ethan's mouth lifted in the smallest smile. It was celebration, disguised but unmistakable. I stood there, shaking, and no one stopped them. Dr. Patel turned to walk away. As he passed me, his shoulder brushed mine. His hand slid something into my palm. A folded piece of paper. He didn't look at me when he did it. He just said quietly, "I'm sorry," and kept walking like the hallway might swallow him. I didn't open the paper until I got to the bathroom. I locked myself in a stall like a teenager hiding from a fight. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely unfold it. The note was written in tight, rushed handwriting. "Mr. Williams, she is alive. Do not trust the Hargroves. Say nothing. Meet me tonight, 10 p.m., parking garage C, level 3. Come alone." My breath stopped. Alive? My mind rejected it like a body rejecting poison. I read it again, and again. Then I heard the bathroom door open. Voices. Victor and Marlene. Their voices were low, pleased. "It's done," Marlene said. Victor answered, "We control the narrative. We control everything." My mouth went dry. I folded the note, shoved it into my wallet, and walked out with a face I didn't recognize. They planned the funeral fast, too fast. Closed casket. Private viewing for immediate family only, meaning the Hargroves, not me. Marlene called me 2 days later with a voice like she was reading from a script. "James, dear, we'll be having Lily cremated. It's more efficient." Efficient. I asked to see her. I asked to say goodbye. Marlene sighed as if I was being unreasonable. "There isn't much to see. Please understand." Victor took the phone and said, "Mr. Williams, you're emotional. We are handling this." I wanted to scream. I wanted to drive to their house and break down their gates with my truck, but the note burned in my wallet like a live coal. Say nothing. Come alone. So I played along. At the memorial service, Ethan stood at the front with his parents, head bowed, hands clasped, looking like a grieving husband in a magazine article. People murmured about tragedy, about young lives lost, about how brave Ethan was. I watched him accept hugs with practiced solemnity. I watched Marlene dab at dry eyes. I watched Victor speak to the pastor like he owned the building, and I felt something in me turn hard. At the end, they placed an urn on a pedestal. An urn. No body, no proof. Just a container and a story they wanted the world to believe. I walked out before anyone could corner me with condolences. I drove around aimlessly until the sky went dark. Then I parked 2 blocks away from St. Catherine's and waited. At 9:55 p.m., I walked into parking garage C. It was mostly empty. Concrete pillars, flickering lights, the smell of oil and cold air. My footsteps echoed like gunshots. Level 3 was quieter. Then I saw him. Dr. Patel stood near a gray sedan, coat over his scrubs, shoulders hunched like he expected someone to put a bag over his head. When he saw me, his relief was so sharp it looked like pain. "You came," he whispered. "You wrote that," I said, holding up the note. "Explain it." He glanced around, then motioned me closer. "Not here. Get in your car. Drive to the far corner. Keep your headlights off." I did it without thinking, because something in his face told me that hesitation could kill. I parked where he pointed. He slid into the passenger seat of my old pickup like a man climbing into a coffin. "I need you to understand something," he said. "If I'm seen talking to you, I lose my license. If they decide I'm a problem, I lose more than that." "Who's they?" I asked, though I already knew. His eyes flicked to my wallet on the dashboard where the note had been. "The Hargroves," he said, "and the people they own." My stomach twisted. "My granddaughter is alive?" He hesitated. That half second was enough to make my blood run cold. "Tell me," I said. "Don't do that. Don't hesitate." Dr. Patel exhaled. "Lily did not die in that delivery room." The words hit me so hard I almost couldn't process them. "She hemorrhaged," he continued quickly. "It was severe, but we stabilized her. She was conscious. She asked for you." My throat closed. "She asked for me?" He nodded, eyes shining. "She said, 'Please don't let them take my baby.'" My hands clenched around the steering wheel. "The baby?" Dr. Patel's voice dropped. "The baby was alive. Premature, distressed but alive. We transferred the baby to the NICU. I felt like I might vomit." "Then what?" I demanded. Dr. Patel's jaw tightened. "Then Victor Hargrove arrived with hospital administration. Paperwork appeared that I had never seen. Consent forms. Transfer orders. They claimed Lily had signed them. She hadn't. She was barely conscious." My pulse hammered. "Where is she?" His face tightened again. "They moved her. Out of my unit. Out of the hospital. An ambulance I didn't authorize." "Where?" "I don't know," he said, and the despair in his voice was real. "They blocked my access. They locked the chart. A nurse who tried to ask questions was sent home and told not to come back." He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded strip of paper, the kind they print from monitors. He handed it to me like evidence. "This is her vitals," he said. "Time-stamped after they declared her dead." My vision blurred as I stared at the printout. Numbers. Lines. Proof that something had been alive when they told me she wasn't. "Why?" I whispered, though rage was already building the answer. Dr. Patel swallowed. "There was a prenatal contract." "A what?" "I'm not supposed to know," he said, voice shaking. "But I overheard enough. The Hargroves wanted the baby, not Lily. They wanted her out of the way." I sat there in that dark truck listening to a doctor tell me my granddaughter had been erased like a mistake on paper. "Listen," Dr. Patel said. "They will watch you. They will expect you to grieve and disappear. If you move wrong, Lily—" He stopped as if he couldn't finish the sentence. "What do I do?" I asked, and I hated the weakness in my own voice. Dr. Patel reached into his pocket again and slid a small USB drive into my hand. "Security logs," he whispered. "Transfer time. A vehicle plate number. It's not much, but it's something. And one more thing." He scribbled something on the back of my note with a pen that shook slightly. A name. Rachel Chen. "NICU nurse," he said. "She didn't agree with what happened. She's scared, but she's good." Before I could ask more, headlights swept across the garage entrance. Dr. Patel flinched like he'd been shot. "That's my cue," he breathed. "Burn the note if you have to. Do not let them find it." He got out of my truck, shut the door without a sound, and disappeared between concrete pillars. I sat there until my heartbeat stopped trying to escape my chest. Then I drove home and did something I hadn't done since I carried my daughter's coffin. I cried until I couldn't breathe. At dawn, grief turned into a plan. I didn't call the police first, not because I don't believe in law, but because I know how law breaks when money leans on it. I used to do investigations for a living. I've watched paperwork become a weapon. I started with what I could control. I went to St. Catherine's and asked for Lily's records. The woman at the desk smiled with professional emptiness. "I'm sorry, sir, you're not listed as next of kin." "I'm her grandfather," I said. "Her mother is dead." She tapped at her keyboard. "Her husband is next of kin." Of course he was. "Then I want the death certificate," I said. Her smile didn't change. "That will be provided to the family." I leaned in and lowered my voice. "Ma'am, I have reason to believe a crime occurred." Her eyes flicked up, alarmed for a fraction of a second. Then she stood. One moment. A security guard appeared 2 minutes later. He didn't touch me. He didn't need to. His presence was the message. I walked out before they could turn it into a scene. Next, I called the only person I trusted with the kind of ugly truth that sounded insane. Hank Rodriguez. Hank is a retired detective I worked alongside years ago. He's the kind of man who doesn't speak unless he has something worth saying. And when he looks at you, you feel like your lies are sweating. He met me at my kitchen table that afternoon. I showed him the note, the monitor strip, the USB drive. He didn't interrupt. He just listened, eyes hardening with every detail. When I finished, he said, "They're trying to steal a baby." "And erase Lily," I said. Hank nodded once. "We move carefully." I wanted to move violently. I wanted to drive to the Hargroves gate and rip it off its hinges with my hands. But careful was the only way to keep Lily alive, if she was alive. We watched Ethan's house from a distance that night. Hank's old binoculars, my hands shaking with fury. The Hargrove estate sat quiet behind its gates, lit like a museum. At 8:12 p.m., a black SUV pulled in. At 8:20, another. At 8:35, a nurse's car. "Why would a nurse be there?" I asked. Hank's jaw clenched. "Because somebody's paying her." I felt my stomach drop. Then the worst part happened. At 9:03 p.m., Ethan walked out onto the front steps with Victor and Marlene. Victor held a cigar. Marlene carried a champagne flute. And through the open doorway, I saw a pale blue balloon. A baby balloon. My vision narrowed. "No." Hank looked at me sharply. "James, they have the baby," I rasped. "They're celebrating in their house while Lily was somewhere unknown, possibly drugged, possibly trapped, possibly thinking no one came for her." That night I didn't sleep. I sat in my living room with the urn-shaped void of grief still sitting in my chest, and I stared at the USB drive until dawn. In the morning, Hank and I plugged it into a clean laptop. The files were ugly and simple. Timestamps, access logs, a vehicle plate, and one line that made my hands go numb. Patient transfer, L. Williams. Status, stable. Destination, private transport. Hargrove Medical. Hargrove Medical, not a hospital I'd ever heard of. We searched quietly, not online, not through public records that could ping a trace. Hank had a friend who owed him, a friend who didn't ask questions. By noon we had an address. It wasn't a hospital. It was a recovery center in the outskirts, fenced, hidden behind trees, listed as a private women's wellness retreat. "Wellness," Hank muttered. "That's a pretty word for captivity." My hands were trembling as I loaded my truck with what Hank told me to bring: a flashlight, a spare phone, a clean shirt, and restraint. "We don't go in like heroes," Hank said. "We go in like men who want her alive." We needed someone inside. Rachel Chen answered my call after the third ring. Her voice was cautious. "Who is this?" "My name is James Williams," I said. "I think you know why I'm calling." Silence. Then a whisper. "They said you weren't safe." My throat tightened. "They said that because they don't want me looking." Her breath caught. "I shouldn't talk to you." "Rachel," I said softly, "if Lily is alive, she needs someone who still remembers she's a person, not a problem to solve." There was a long pause, the kind that sounds like someone deciding whether to jump off a ledge. "I saw her," Rachel whispered. My vision blurred. "You saw Lily." "She was conscious," Rachel said, voice shaking. "They told us she had complications, that she was unstable, that the family requested privacy. Then security moved her. The chart locked, and then they told everyone she died." I gripped the phone so hard my knuckles burned. "Where did they take her?" "I don't know," Rachel said, and I heard tears in her voice. "But I know one thing. The baby didn't die." I closed my eyes, pain tearing through me. "Where is the baby?" Rachel's breath trembled. They said the baby was transferred for specialized care, but the paperwork, it wasn't normal. And Ethan's mother, Marlene, she came to the NICU wearing perfume like she was going to lunch. She stood over the incubator and smiled. Smiled, Mr. Williams. A sound escaped me that was half sob, half growl. Rachel continued, faster now, like she'd opened a door and couldn't close it. I copied something. A discharge summary. It listed a private pediatrician, Dr. Lowell Crane. He's connected. Like them. Send it, Hank said, leaning close to my phone. Rachel hesitated. If they find out, they won't, Hank said, his voice calm and absolute. Not if you do it right now. She did. Within minutes, Hank had a name, an address, and a pattern. Dr. Crane's clinic was in a wealthy neighborhood, the kind of clinic with muted colors and soft music and privacy agreements thicker than medical ethics, the kind of place where rich people go to make problems disappear. And that's when the situation escalated from cruel to dangerous. That evening, as I stood in my kitchen staring at the printed discharge summary, my phone buzzed with an unknown number. One text. Stop digging if you want her to keep breathing. No name, no signature, just a threat wrapped in certainty. My blood turned to ice. Hank read it, then looked at me. They know you know. I swallowed. Then we don't have time. The next 48 hours felt like living inside a storm. We didn't sleep. We didn't eat properly. We moved in small steps, gathering proof with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. Hank got a warrant the old-fashioned way, by putting evidence in front of one honest prosecutor who still believed in consequences. I played the role the Hargroves expected, broken grandfather, grieving, compliant. I called Marlene and thanked her for handling everything, and the sweetness in her voice made me want to smash my phone. She invited me to a private family closure dinner at their house. It's important, she said, for healing. I knew what it was, a victory lap. I told her I'd come. Hank stared at me like I'd lost my mind. They'll watch you, he said. They might even set you up. I'm counting on it, I said, and for the first time since this began, I felt something like control, because if they wanted to celebrate in front of me, I would let them, and I would make sure the world saw what kind of people they were. That night, I walked into the Hargrove house wearing the suit I buried my wife in. My hands were steady, but my heart felt like it had teeth. Victor greeted me with a hand on my shoulder like we were allies. Marlene kissed my cheek and whispered, "We're so glad you're here, James." Ethan stood by the fireplace looking bored. They led me into their dining room where candles burned and food sat untouched like decoration, and in the corner of the room, a bassinet. My stomach flipped. Marlene followed my gaze and smiled. "Oh," she said softly, "don't look so shocked. Life continues." I forced my face into something blank. "Whose baby is that?" Victor lifted his wine glass. "A miracle," he said. Ethan smirked. "A fresh start." I felt my vision blur with rage. Then Marlene said it, like she couldn't help herself. "Lily gave us the one thing she was useful for," she murmured. And then she did the decent thing and left. My nails dug into my palm. I looked around the room and saw what they really were. People who thought money made them untouchable. People who believed a young woman's life was an inconvenience. People who had celebrated her death because it cleared their path. I sat down. I let them talk. I let them toast. And I recorded every word with the small device Hank had clipped inside my jacket. When Victor finally raised his glass and said, "To legacy," I smiled back at him. "To legacy," I repeated. He didn't realize that, at that exact moment, Hank and a team were already moving toward Hargrove Medical with a warrant in hand. Because while the Hargroves were busy congratulating themselves, we had followed the trail to the recovery center. And what we found there was worse than I'd feared. The building looked like a spa from the outside. soft lights, calm signage, a fountain to make you forget there were locks on the doors. Inside, the air smelled like disinfectant and lavender, like someone had tried to perfume control. A manager in a crisp blazer tried to block Hank at the desk with a smile. Hank showed the warrant. Her smile died. They led us down a hallway with muted carpet and security cameras tucked into corners like insects. And then, behind a locked door, they found Lily. She was pale, thinner, 4 bruises on her arms, a faint yellowing to her skin like she hadn't seen real sunlight in days. Her hair was pulled back, messy, and her eyes were open but unfocused, like someone had tried to drown her mind in medication. When I stepped into the room, my knees almost buckled. "Lily," I whispered. Her gaze flicked to me. For a moment there was nothing, no recognition, just a blank stare that terrified me more than any scream. Then her lips parted. "Grandpa James?" she rasped, like she was testing whether the name was real. I made a sound that was pure broken relief. I crossed the room and took her hand gently, afraid she'd vanish if I touched her too hard. "I'm here," I said. "I'm here. I'm not leaving." Tears slid down her cheeks, silent, exhausted. "They told me you didn't come," she whispered. "They told me you believed I was dead." I closed my eyes. They lied. Her fingers tightened weakly around mine. "My baby," she breathed. "Where is my baby?" My throat closed. Hank stepped in quietly. "We're finding her," he said. "Right now." The raid on Dr. Crane's clinic happened an hour later. They found the baby in a private nursery suite behind locked doors, monitored, cared for, documented under a different name. Not Lily's child on paper. A Hargrove child. Victor's legacy. When Hank called me with confirmation, I sank to the floor of that recovery center hallway and sobbed like a man who had been carrying a coffin on his back for weeks. Lily met her daughter the next morning, wrapped in blankets, trembling with grief and fury and love. I stood in the corner of the room, tears on my face, watching the world return to its rightful order. But I wasn't finished, because saving Lily and the baby was justice. What I wanted next was consequence. Remember that dinner? While Victor, Marlene, and Ethan were still sitting in their candlelit dining room congratulating themselves, the front door opened and uniformed officers stepped inside. Victor stood up, outraged. "Do you have any idea whose home you're in?" Hank walked in behind them, calm as winter. "Yes," Hank said. "That's why we're here." Marlene's face went stiff. Ethan's smirk cracked. Victor started talking fast, threatening lawsuits, calling names, demanding phone calls. Then Hank played a short clip, just audio. Marlene's voice, sweet and deadly. "Lily gave us the one thing she was useful for." Victor's voice. "To legacy." Ethan's voice. "A fresh start." The room went silent in a way that felt holy. Marlene's hand trembled around her wine glass. "That's... How dare you?" Hank didn't raise his voice. "You declared a living woman dead. You falsified medical records. You unlawfully transferred a patient. You concealed a living infant and attempted to rewrite identity documents. You threatened a witness. And you just confessed to motive in your own dining room." Victor's face went gray in slow motion, like blood draining from a statue. Ethan tried to run. He didn't make it past the foyer. When they cuffed Marlene, she turned to me with eyes full of hate so pure it looked like a religion. "This is your fault," she hissed. "If you had known your place—" I stepped closer, and my voice came out steady, low, and final. "My place," I said, "is beside my granddaughter. Always." Victor was led out, still shouting, still trying to buy his way out with words. Ethan kept his head down, finally looking like the coward he was. Marlene walked out with her pearls still around her neck, but her hands were cuffed, and for the first time in her life she looked powerless. The aftermath was ugly, but it was theirs to endure. There were hearings. Investigations. A hospital scandal that hit the news hard enough to shake St. Catherine's administration like rotten wood. Dr. Patel's testimony mattered. Rachel's evidence mattered. The recordings mattered. I kept legal details out of Lily's room. She needed healing, not courtroom language. The Hargroves lost their recovery center, their clinic connections, their reputation, their control. Victor tried to negotiate. Marlene tried to play victim. Ethan tried to blame everyone else. None of it mattered when the truth had teeth. Lily moved into my house for a while. I converted my den into a nursery. I learned how to warm bottles and change diapers with hands that had once been steady only for tools and steering wheels. At night, Lily would sit in the rocking chair, holding her daughter, whispering promises into that tiny forehead. Sometimes she would look up at me and the grief would hit her again. "They celebrated," she'd whisper. "They celebrated like I was nothing." I would sit beside her and say, "You're not nothing. You're here, and they can't rewrite that." Here is what I can't stop thinking about. If Dr. Patel hadn't slipped me that note, my granddaughter would have disappeared into paperwork. My great-granddaughter would have grown up believing she belonged to people who treated her mother like a disposable incubator. And I would have spent the rest of my life grieving a lie. So, when people ask me whether I went too far, whether I should have let the system handle it, whether I should have been gentler, I look at Lily. I look at that baby. And I think about champagne in a hospital hallway. Tell me the truth. If you were me, would you have stopped after saving them? Or would you have made sure the people who did it felt the full weight of what they tried to get away with? Victor stood up, outraged. "Do you have any idea whose home you're in?" Hank walked in behind them, calm as winter. "Yes," Hank said. "That's why we're here." Marlene's face went stiff. Ethan's smirk cracked. Victor started talking fast, threatening lawsuits, calling names, demanding phone calls. Then Hank played a short clip, just audio. Marlene's voice, sweet and deadly. "Lily gave us the one thing she was useful for." Victor's voice. "To legacy." Ethan's voice. "A fresh start." The room went silent in a way that felt holy. Marlene's hand trembled around her wine glass. How dare you?" Hank didn't raise his voice. "You declared a living woman dead. You falsified medical records. You unlawfully transferred a patient. You concealed a living infant and attempted to rewrite identity documents. You threatened a witness. And you just confessed to motive in your own dining room." Victor's face went gray in slow motion, like blood draining from a statue. Ethan tried to run. He didn't make it past the foyer. When they cuffed Marlene, she turned to me with eyes full of hate so pure it looked like a religion. "This is your fault," she hissed. "If you had known your place—" I stepped closer, and my voice came out steady, low, and final. "My place," I said, "is beside my granddaughter. Always." Victor was led out, still shouting, still trying to buy his way out with words. Ethan kept his head down, finally looking like the coward he was. Marlene walked out with her pearls still around her neck, but her hands were cuffed, and for the first time in her life she looked powerless. The aftermath was ugly, but it was theirs to endure. There were hearings, investigations, a hospital scandal that hit the news hard enough to shake St. Catherine's administration like rotten wood. Dr. Patel's testimony mattered. Rachel's evidence mattered. The recordings mattered. I kept legal details out of Lily's room. She needed healing, not courtroom language. The Hargroves lost their recovery center, their clinic connections, their reputation, their control. Victor tried to negotiate. Marlene tried to play victim. Ethan tried to blame everyone else. None of it mattered when the truth had teeth. Lily moved into my house for a while. I converted my den into a nursery. I learned how to warm bottles and change diapers with hands that had once been steady only for tools and steering wheels. At night, Lily would sit in the rocking chair, holding her daughter, whispering promises into that tiny forehead. Sometimes she would look up at me and the grief would hit her again. "They celebrated," she'd whisper. They celebrated like I was nothing. I would sit beside her and say, "You're not nothing. You're here." And they can't rewrite that. Here is what I can't stop thinking about. If Dr. Patel hadn't slipped me that note, my granddaughter would have disappeared into paperwork. My great-granddaughter would have grown up believing she belonged to people who treated her mother like a disposable incubator. And I would have spent the rest of my life grieving a lie. So, when people ask me whether I went too far, whether I should have let the system handle it, whether I should have been gentler, I look at Lily. I look at that baby. And I think about champagne in a hospital hallway. Tell me the truth. If you were me, would you have stopped after saving them? Or would you have made sure the people who did it felt the full weight of what they tried to get away with?
My grandpa's words really happened. I believe him. If you want more true tales like this, hit subscribe.